moving into what I kind of wanted to talk about today is this whole concept of energy dominance through logistical islanding of our installations. And I'll tie it back to the expeditionary at the end here. But this started for me while I was over at the Pentagon. We had to go through this exercise called Pearl Harbor 2.0. Most of that exercise I can't really talk about in this setting, but you kind of get the gist from the name, right? There was a real world thing that caused us to go in and produce some analysis. Part of that analysis, we looked at, Hurricane Florence at Camp Lejeune. So when Hurricane Florence hit Camp Lejeune, the power was disrupted for about 2 weeks. So no power on the base for 2 weeks. All of the landline communications were down, and all the cell were down for, I think cellular communications was about 3 weeks. Right? So with that, being aboard the base at the time, we lost the ability to pump gas. Right? So we couldn't pump gas. We had one gravity-fed pump on the entire base. We lost the ability to cook food for the Marines. I think we were on day 4, and I saw some of them breaking into a vending machine to get candy to eat, because we also do not store enough food aboard our bases to sustain the number of people. And we absolutely were not even considering all of the people in base housing, the families and spouses, who couldn't get off the base because the bridges were washed out. Right? So that was the kind of problem we were looking at. We couldn't talk, we couldn't power, we couldn't fuel, we couldn't feed ourselves, right? So the base was a bit of a sandwich. And none of the damage, the base did have damage, mostly structural damage to buildings, but the infrastructure that caused all those problems, none of it was on the base, right? All of it was off the base. So the whole concept of islanding the installation is how can the installation's CONUS act like a forward operating base 4, where they're able to produce their own energy, they're able to feed their own people, they have applications infrastructure, and they're pushing that combat power out. Just like our bases are supposed to project power forward. So kind of moving on from that, if I can assume that I can now move that energy infrastructure, say like the small nuclear reactors that we're talking about here later this week, and I can produce that power and I move it aboard the base. Say I move some of the communications infrastructure aboard the base, like the private 5G network that they have over here at Miramar. Right now I start islanding this thing. That'll enable some of the other logistical support that we talked about. And now I have assured power, I can assured communicate, and I can probably hopefully feed my people. I can now start to project power. Rewinding back to that whole thing about Camp Lejeune, the worst part about this whole scenario, other than my headquarters building, which was open storage, the roof got ripped off and all of the big papers went blowing into the hurricane. That was great. But we actually had the Global Reaction Force aboard the base at the time. So those who are not familiar, the GER Force, dominated by SecDef, it's on a rotation. They have to be able to deploy anywhere in the world within 24 hours. Well, guess who couldn't deploy because the power was out and none of the C2 systems were working? The GER Force. So backing up here, I put all of that aboard the base. Well now, previously, adversary targeteers, guys like myself and on the other side, they didn't have to ever attack the base. They knew that I could take out SDG&E and all of these bases lose their power and all these other capabilities. I could throw some trash into the brush and take care of most of your communications infrastructure when the fire starts, right? Now they're gonna actually have to look at hard targeting those bases. So whether it's intentional or not, or it just happens to be when this legislative change is going through, there was a section that we worked through the legislative change proposal while I was at the headquarters called Section 130I of Title 10. What Section 130I allows is for an installation to be able to, under certain conditions, interdict, disrupt, or destroy UAS within CONUS. Right? Normally, Title 10 forces, we're very limited on what we can do in CONUS. We can't violate the Posse Comitatus Act, among other things. It's only UAS, all right? And it's very, very limited in scope, and policy really has a policy and like orders and all the other things, all the way down to SOPs, that they haven't been put in place. Even worse, we've now started to acquire and field counter-UAS systems and give them to the bases. So now you have an installation commander who has approval authority to either disrupt, so he can radiate to disrupt the control, or radiate to disrupt the actual we would call it video downlinks of what the operator can see, or they can radiate to destroy or shoot to destroy, an actual kinetic kill, right? So if you think about that, now I've got a base commander approval authority. Who is the base operations center? They're typically the military police, about 3/4 of which right now are contract. They are EMS, so the paramedics and the fire department, and they're just a few random administrators, right? Typically, when I shoot down a UAS, either kinetically or with RF, when there's gravity, it's going to fall somewhere. Murphy's Law says it's going to fall on a nun and a bunch of kids in a bus, right? That's just how collateral damage seems to work out, right? So now I've got a relatively unclear piece of legislation because that drone doesn't have to be in the base's airspace or within the perimeter of the base to actually affect the base. So when can they actually interdict it? I've got an untrained staff who now has the equipment, so they're not manned or trained properly, but they are equipped, right? And they got very, very unclear guidance, right? So right now they're in the process of updating that particular piece of legislation, and hopefully we can do the training and the manning properly, and we get the policy and the orders in place. I bring that up as just one example of this buzzword that you see floating around DC all the time called operationalizing installations. I hate that because I actually have a hard time saying the words operationalizing installations when I'm standing up in front of you. So hopefully I didn't stutter on that too bad. But that's really what they mean. How do we take this that I've now made a giant target because I've done my energy job properly and defend the thing? Right. One example we have here is something that we've been working on with the Department of Navy on using artificial intelligence to plan screens of drones to take out some of these multi-domain threats. I did mention, but the Section 130I only covers UAS, right? By the time these things catch up, we're already on multi-domain drones. You're starting to see UUVs that can drive and then fly, right? We're seeing very, very capable USVs and UUVs, as well as you're starting to see a lot more unmanned ground vehicles, even though, that's a lot harder of a problem. We don't want to wait to get this legislation and the corresponding policy and therefore the manning, training, and equipping in place.